What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Cleveland Pulse YouTube channel. I'm glad to be back with my best bud, Jeff. It's been a while. We're here to bring you some Browns news, something that we haven't done, live in person for a while. I haven't talked Browns face to face with Jeff in a minute. I've been moving in, as you guys may be able to tell, new background. I'm back at Ohio State now, so final semester and all that good jazz. But keeping the pleasantries short, Jeff, how are you doing, my guy?
I'm doing good. Like you said, both of us pretty busy. Both of us starting school back up, trying to get that part of our lives taken care of, finished up. And this is pretty much our last week of just talking, preseason. It's the last week of preseason. Of course, there's next week, but we're going to be so busy next week. I could already tell you guys that we're going to have a lot of stuff coming next week that we've already talked about, some new stuff. And then we got the season. So I'm excited for this last week of not having a whole lot of Browns to talk about besides this 53-man roster.
Absolutely. And like Jeff said, we're going to have a lot of stuff coming in the next week. So if you guys could please drop a subscribe, like, comment, all that good stuff. We're going to have a lot coming out and we're going to be pretty busy this season. So keep your guys' eye out for our Twitter page and all of our YouTube links. So with that being said, we are going to talk about the 53-man roster. Just go over it real quickly. A couple of the waiver wires that have happened also today. Today is Wednesday, the 1st of September. So with that all being said, I'm just going to go down the line position by position, and we're going to start with the offense. Obviously, at quarterback, you got Baker Mayfield and Case Keenum. Running back, you got 4 running backs still: Nick Chubb, Kareem Hunt, D'Ernest Johnson, and Demetric Felton. You kept Andy Janovich at fullback, and then you retained 6 wide receivers, although it's only displaying 5 as of right now, which are Odell Beckham Jr., Jarvis Landry, Rashard Higgins, Donovan Peoples-Jones, and Anthony Schwartz on the active roster. Then you got tight ends with Austin Hooper, David Njoku, and Harrison Bryant. That's one less than we typically see on the active roster, especially with Kevin Stefanski. And you got 10 O-linemen with Jedrick Willis Jr., Joel Bitonio, J.C. Treader, Wyatt Teller, Jack Conklin, your starting offensive line, and then Chris Hubbard, James Hudson, Nick Harris, Michael Dunn, Blake Hance. Jeff, anything really quickly to take away with all this?
I think
on the offensive side, at least.
I think, like you said, I think we usually have 4 tight ends, and that's it's probably won't be seen, on paper, but losing Stephen Carlson for the year, a guy on special teams who played really well, I felt like last year and even 2 years ago, that's something to note there with us only having 3 tight ends. I know that it was rumored that maybe we will be in the waiver wire claims for a tight end on the offensive side of the ball. And definitely the interesting one here, which I know you're going to want to talk about, is KhaDarel Hodge not making the roster. Most definitely the biggest, not disappointment, but almost the biggest, that's a guy we wish we could have kept around, but it just didn't work. It just wasn't, it wasn't in the cards for KhaDarel Hodge on this roster.
Yeah, and your point to that, and I think it should be echoed, it's just that it's a disappointment not to see him on the roster, but I think it's a testament to what this roster is in terms of just man, you have guys that are fan favorites and personal favorites. I had a couple of fan favorites that got cut, but I think KhaDarel Hodge, in the great scheme of things, was probably the fan favorite of players that got cut. And what we had originally thought was 5 active wide receivers. Obviously, we could flex Demetric Felton into that wide receiver position, but I thought it was awkward to only have 5 wide receivers. Then I remembered that we have Davian Davis, who is on the protocol list for being suspended, on the suspended list. So that's why there's a quotation upon 6 wide receivers in that room. So yeah, just something that I thought was interesting. Obviously, I made the argument on our Twitter page yesterday that, you could have probably cut D'Ernest Johnson because of what little workload he was going to get. But I think you could make that argument with KhaDarel Hodge now too, with, the step that Donovan Peoples-Jones has made, and obviously the prospect of Anthony Schwartz being a burner. So either way, you weren't going to get too much workload out of either Hodge or Johnson, but I think they're special teams players, which I think out of the 2 of them, Hodge was just more active.
Right. I think the emergence of Demetric Felton in camp is probably the main reason that KhaDarel Hodge is not making this roster, solely because he could play that slot receiver position that, we have him listed as a running back, which is kind of
Yeah.
misleading because we saw more of him as a wide receiver in the preseason. But between Felton and Dearness Johnson, I mean, it makes more sense to keep guys around who could be running backs, especially with how good our offensive line is, over our sixth wide receiver, I guess you could say.
Yeah, absolutely. We did re-sign a couple of players to our reserve team. By the way, Kadero Hodge, not to our reserve team, to our practice squad. Kadero Hodge ended up on the Lions. But that being said, we did re-sign Johnny Stanton and JoJo Natson from the offensive side and Jordan Franks to come and play on the practice squad. So those guys are back with the team. But moving on from that, we're going to go on to the defensive side of the ball. Starting off with the D-line, keeping 8 players: Myles Garrett, Jadeveon Clowney, Takk McKinley, Malik Jackson, Andrew Billings, Jordan Elliott, Malik McDowell, Tommy Togiai. Then we go to linebacker. We keep 7 players. Obviously, one of these players is going to get put on injury reserve, but that's Anthony Walker, Jeremiah Wosu-Karamoa, Mac Wilson, Sione Takitaki, Malcolm Smith, and Tony Fields, and Jacob Phillips being the last player, but he's going on IR. We'll talk about that for a minute later, but going on to safety, we kept 4, which is John Johnson III, Ronnie Harrison, Richard LeCount III, and Grant Delpit. And then we kept 6 corners: Denzel Ward, Greg Newsome, Troy Hill, Greedy Williams, MJ Stewart, and AJ Green. And then we have our 3 special teams player, Chase McLaughlin, our kicker, which surprisingly, we did not go out and get a new kicker, Jamie Gillen and Charlie Hewitt. Jeff, let's start with you. Anything that pops out on the defensive side of the ball first?
I think it's been apparent for a while, and just looking at our final 8 defensive linemen, I think at least our interior defensive line could be a big question mark, which I know me and you have talked about that. It's kind of the opposite of last year, how the back end of our defense was going to probably be the weakest link. I really do think that even after training camp and with how young our linebackers are, I do think our interior defensive line is the weakest part of our defense. Even with Jacob Phillips hurt, I think the linebackers get a slight bump just because Anthony Walker and, the boom potential of JOK, of course. I think Takk McKinley, we don't really know a whole lot. He missed a pretty good amount of the preseason with personal reasons. I think it'll be good to hopefully get him back on track. You got Malik Jackson, who he was brought in to be the guy in the middle. Andrew Billings, someone who hasn't even played football in a while. And then, you got some good upside with Malik McDowell, which he's becoming seemingly a fan favorite on the defensive side of the ball too. I was a little intrigued that we didn't keep Joe Jackson around, but it makes sense with going with Jordan Elliott instead, the more I look at it.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree on all those fronts. And we don't even know, how the defensive line is going to play in terms of, who's going to line up where, because it's been, mentioned and talked about that Clowney will line up inside time to time. So we'll see a couple of different variations on the D line. Linebacker, that I think that was clear cut. No one really outside of my field of view that I thought was going to make it over the guys listed. But the reason why Jacob Phillips was kept on the team to the 53-man roster and then put on the IR is because I believe the belief is if you put him on IR before the seasons or before the 53-man roster cuts, he's out for the year. You cannot bring him back. So I'm guessing what we heard was a season-ending bicep injury may potentially leave the door open for him to come back towards the end of the season or even for the playoffs. So that's interesting. But besides that, I think everyone else is pretty standard. Obviously at safety, LeCount, keeping 4 safeties in what we think is going to be a 3 safety main defense, is interesting. But outside of that, I only wanted Javante Moffett to make it, but anyone else really don't think there's anything interesting to talk about outside of those players. People that we brought back: Porter Gustin, Elijah Lee on the defensive side of the ball.
Yeah, Porter Gustin was somebody who I liked last year a lot, which I kind of thought he might have had a spot on this team, but I guess, bringing in Takk McKinley kind of hurt his chances a lot. On the back end of that defense, you lose Sheldrick, no.
Yeah, you're right.
Sheldrick Redwine. Yeah,
Yep.
he's not on the roster this year. But just so many young guys on the back end, and it's kind of annoying to say it. And it's not that I'm very worried, but because Cody Parkey didn't have, a great,
Yeah.
a lot of great things to say about him. I feel like for the most part, I thought he was pretty good. I thought he was great in the playoffs. Chase McLaughlin, I don't know. I think we might have kicking problems all year long, just from what I saw in one preseason game, which doesn't mean a whole lot. But I wish Cody Parkey was on the roster and not hurt.
Yeah, I hear you absolutely. But yeah, with that all being said, that is your Cleveland Browns 53-man roster. Also, just to make a note, with Jacob Phillips going onto the IR list at some point, and I believe one of these other offensive linemen maybe. Two players might make it onto the active roster. So Porter Gustin and maybe like Elijah Lee or someone else will make it onto the active roster, which will be interesting. But with that being said, Jeff, anything else before we call it a quits?
I'm excited. I think we definitely have the most roster competition around the league, and that's a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So with that all being said, everyone, thank you very much for watching. Let us know what you guys thought about the cuts. If there's anyone, surprising that you thought got cut or that we brought back, and what you guys are thinking for the rest of this season. And hopefully, like we said, subscribe, like, comment. We're going to have a lot of stuff coming out in the next few weeks. So we're ready for the Browns season to start. And I know you guys all are too. With that being said, peace.